Are you in a position where you're defined by your age, and that's limiting you to pursue a dream or goal you want to accomplish? The More Than Your Age podcast is about having conversations with women who fully live their lives without being dictated or defined by their age. This is a space to encourage women who feel blocked to pursue a dream or goal based on their life circumstances. Welcome to the More Than Your Age podcast. I am your host, Erica Pasvar. Let's start living life fully and become more than your age. Adele, all the way from Aussie land, thank you for joining me today on the More Than Your Age podcast. I'm glad to have you here.
Thank you, Erica. I am really happy to be here.
Yes, well, for the listeners, it is 7 a.m. Adele's time. It is 2 o'clock p.m. my time. So Adele woke up bright and early to conduct this interview, so I appreciate it. We were talking beforehand, before we started recording. We couldn't quite remember how we connected. I think it was some Facebook group. It either was like I was looking for guests or you were responding to somebody else, but you had mentioned that you had started taking hip-hop classes at the age of 41. And I said, oh, that's my type of person. I got to talk to her. So
Here I am.
Here you are.
Yeah, that's right.
Was this your first time taking any type of dance class, especially hip hop?
Especially hip hop, absolutely. Yes. So my only previous dance was a 1 year, maybe two, stint of ballet, which I think is kind of mandatory in certain areas of the world. Off you go and do some dance. It only looks like this, ballet. And I loved it, but I was 8. And at around the same time, my mother had organised vocal lessons or singing lessons. And I just knew she wanted me to sing more than she wanted me to dance. So the inevitable conversation happened between mother and multiple. I'm one of 3, so it was kind of her doing the juggle of, Adele, you can't do everything. So I said, all right, Mum, I know what you mean. I'll choose singing. And therefore dance in little Deli's heart was just put to the side and closed up. And I didn't actually know I did that until I was 41 and had this moment in time that preceded me turning up for what has just been hip hop ever since.
Wow, that's so cool. Okay, well, now that I know that you, little Deli, was a singer, did you perform a lot or was it just kind of a hobby thing? Do you still perform and sing?
That's a good question. As vocal training goes, at least in where I lived in Australia, you always had the mandatory Eisteddfods. I'm not sure if you call them Eisteddfods. Do you have Eisteddfods in America?
No,
Okay,
I have no idea what you're
nope. They're
okay.
Competitions with adjudicators, all these weird words that are really quite foreign to the rest of everything else I was doing. I was also a tennis player and whatever. So I did the mandatory Eisteddfods, which was about 3 or 4 a year. And I started to, I also did examinations. So I would go to an external Conservatorium of Music, which is kind of like the pinnacle of music in Australia. And they would assess you basically on your vocal skill, your technique, your history, your knowledge. And then eventually you can move into teaching yourself, which I never did because I lacked the vision to see that was a good thing to do. Youth, right? Youth is wasted on the young. So
right.
So I did, and then that actually graduated as I married quite young. I married at 23 and then had babies basically from then on. Not now though, yay. And then that morphed into like worship leading and leading in a church setting and raising up our children. We have 4 children in their musical world. So nothing was ever kind of lost in my life.
Yeah. Does your family have a band? Do y'all, sing around the piano? Sometimes I have visuals. Yeah.
I'm the keyboardist and my second son is the guitarist and an excellent one, very adaptable. He now teaches guitar on Zoom. And then everybody can sing. It's just whether they want to or not, I think is the underpinning thought there.
Okay, so a very creative family. It started with Deli. I just love that that's your nickname for yourself. Okay, so back to you. It never really you took ballet 8 years old, stopped because you started singing, and then 41 hits, and you're gonna take a hip hop class. Your boys were taking themselves. So
Uh-huh.
what made you decide? Oh, my boys are doing it. I'm gonna do it too.
Well, it actually was an event. So not only were the boys hip hop dancing, so hip hop has a lot of genres to it. So our second son, the guitarist, he's a popper. So he moves slightly differently to what would be classified as hip hop, but it's definitely part of that scene. And he was at the same studio, but so was my daughter. And she at 14, I think she started, and she's one of those people, Erica, that looks and sees somebody move and then can replicate it.
Oh,
Well,
nice.
I actually have worked really hard to even be vaguely able to do that. So that's not my DNA. But she exemplified one of those groovy people that could dance on a lot of levels and apply excellence really quickly. So she was chosen for a crew which was going to perform at HHI, which is commonly held in Arizona. So as you can imagine, there was a lot of fundraising already afoot, and my daughter was part of that. And an event for the fundraising was that a parent from a crew would have to perform 30 seconds of the said dance. And I was like, well, actually, my husband, who is Samoan, hence the surname Latu, he was like, oh, I'll just do some Samoan dancing, traditional dancing, I'll be fine. 2 days out from that event, so like there is no fallback here. A number of things happened, but he basically kind of realized I can't do what do you mean I was supposed to learn the dance? And it sort of dawned on him, as well as he had a lot of job circumstances which were making him very busy. And I went, don't worry about it, I'll do it. And it wasn't actually the hip hop that drew me. It was the due diligence to, I'm not going to let my daughter down, and we honor our words. And a helpful aspect to this, Erica, is that we've homeschooled our kids. So I was home with the kids. And even though I had, obviously quite a lot to manage with, at the time, the four of them were still all schooling, I had dedicated hours with my daughter. I didn't have to, manage other elements of our life. So I literally threw myself into learning 30 seconds, which is a lot in hip hop world. It is a lot. And I kind of couldn't move. I couldn't even when it comes to like footwork, just actually moving back and forth between each individual foot is actually quite a difficult concept if you're not used to it. Like you forget how to skip even as you get older. You forget this kind of letting go of the ground, because we're so kind of like, I need to be on the ground. I'm safe here. So I noted really quickly I was really inept. My daughter very patiently looked after me, but I did it. And after 2 solid days, I performed this in front of quite a lot of people, and not to any great stature. And I certainly was a bit annoyed at myself for a particular part I didn't get right. But again, it was starting. What this thing did is it's triggered in something in me that was probably dormant, which was I actually really love drilling and working solidly at a thing, at a task, at a skill, at a technique to get it. And I would do this in singing, because once you get to a high level of singing, where you're singing other languages and other styles, so operas and the like, you've really got to work quite succinctly on getting certain elements correct, or the whole piece is actually just not right. And you're assessed on that. So it was really interesting. I was kind of noting this thrill in me that hadn't really been accessed again in my life. So I did the performance, and I got all the cheers and that kind of stuff. And I kind of literally went off like this. I was a bit cranky. And one of the teachers of the studio came up and said to me these words. She said, "You need to dance." And I went, "Don't be ridiculous." Like all the default kicked in. "Don't be ridiculous." She said, "No, you need to dance. And if money's an issue, I will pay for your classes."
Wow.
And it was like, God just knew what I needed to hear to get my attention, because it wasn't really about money. It was that I've actually offered that to people before in other circumstances. So other people that I could see were skilled somewhere, but potentially weren't going to be able to afford tuition. I'd actually set up or started to set up tuition for them on my bill. And I thought, I can't ignore that. It's actually not really about dancing here. This is about a knock. This is like an opportunity knocking, right? So I literally turned up the next week at the adults dance class, which was a very funny moment because everything was wrong. I just was very uncomfortable and I just kept turning up. So really grateful for the studio because they actually enable and have beginners classes.
Yeah, that's so cool. So you show up, the dance teacher says, you need to come, you got to do it. You're like, okay, that's a knock at the door for me to go and show up. You show up. What was the age range of the adult dance class?
Good question. I think there may have been one older than me, but like only 2 years older. So when you're in your 40s, that kind of doesn't matter. And I think there was a few 19-year-olds. So as it would work, you're an adult in Australia, you're an adult at 18, and the crossover is quite significant. You kind of stop being a teenager in these kind of circumstances of being a dance student, and all of a sudden you're either ousted because there is no adult option, or you have to become semi-professional, blah, blah, blah. So there are actually some students in that class who were, in my humble opinion, not beginners. And it was quite disconcerting. But the 40-year-old plus contingent, of which there were a few late 30s, 40s, were so warm and welcoming. They were just thrilled I was there, and that was really like buoying, B-U-O-Y, like just it held me up and made me feel like, yeah, I can do this. And the teacher himself, Johnny, he was just so kind and not condescending kind, like genuinely, I'm glad you're here. Just keep going. It'll be all right. So it was kind of like a really good recipe to keep going.
Yeah, that's so neat. So you had, the teacher there is very encouraging, and then you've got the younger adults, and then you've got those that are around the same age, and they're encouraging you as well. Yeah. I guess after you left the very first dance class, because you obviously kept going, but after you left the first dance class, you said, it went all types of ways. Like what happened, and then what? Yeah. What else did you have to tell yourself to say, no, it's okay, I'm going to keep doing this. Like, that's
a great question.
I got to keep doing this.
Amongst the first movement we had to do was kind of like a slide across the floor, like just a foot slide. So it's not a dramatic thing. It's really just, like I said before, allowing a lightness in your foot to just kind of move one leg toward the other that was stationary in a slide sort of format. And immediately I knew the shoes that I had worn were too grippy. So my mental note that I took home was, I will never wear these shoes to this class again. So, important things. And I think I was pretty okay with what I wore, because that becomes an issue later on, particularly when you break. You know what it would have been? It was my lower back. My lower back went, hey, you've had 4 children. I'm not really ready for this. So I realized I was entering into a lot more than just a dance.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay. So work on the lower back. Did you have to learn specific stretches in order to?
I did. Yeah. I actually started Pilates. So 2020 rolled around and the world changed, and somebody whom I didn't know about became more prominent on an online platform because she kind of needed to be. And I found her there, and she's an Australian in Sydney. I'm about an hour and a half away from Sydney, which most Americans may recognise the city of Sydney's name. And I started my very preliminary openings of Pilates from the beginnings of understanding my core. Everything I should have known. I'm a really big advocate now that I believe every, particularly woman, should be taught Pilates, like just mat Pilates from like 12 onward, because it's going to do you so well for the rest of your life.
Oh, that's good to know. Well, you started doing Pilates and then the hip hop classes, and you started doing it because you were helping your daughter with her dance performance. When you decided to continue with these classes, were your kids supportive? Were they like, oh gosh, mom, what was the overall?
I hear a lot of parents who say that about their experience or their expected experience, but I must say, my children were extremely encouraging. They're my biggest cheerleaders. And the following year, I think, just trying to think through, excuse me, moment where my brain goes back. I'm pretty sure because I started halfway through the year. And in our studio, you have an end of year concert in the final term, so the December time. So I actually did that, right up in the back corner and everything and feeling very inadequate. But, I did it. And I'm pretty sure the next year, my eldest son, did that transition I talked about before where he was no longer a teenager and he crossed over into adults. And he not only was he really encouraging in class, not that he didn't kind of turn his attention all to me, he was just aware he'd check in on me, are you doing all right, kind of thing. And
Oh,
then
that's
when we
sweet.
got home, I would badger him. So we'd be trying to have like food prep, right? And I'd be going, Sammy, what was that move that he did? And because I couldn't even like rock back and forward properly, and I couldn't shuffle and just kind of feel the movement of lightness on my feet, and I would harass him. And I've thanked him profusely for this many times over the years. So I think that answers your question. And the rest of them just kind of, I don't know, they've been to everything I've done, and I've danced with all of them bar one at the moment in an adults class. So I'm not 41 anymore. I'm 47 this year. So in that 5-year space, the other two have grown into adults, and we actually danced together in 23, end of year. We're all on stage together in a class. So that was pretty cool.
That's really neat. Does your husband, does he enjoy doing that kind of dancing too?
No, he enjoys watching it. Yeah, but he hasn't done the leap into it bit yet. Yeah, we're working on that.
Okay. So I actually wanted to ask you something. So I spoke with a woman recently, and she'll join me on the podcast later this month or in March or so. And she shared how she had this desire to participate in this certain hobby, and she was early 50s, mid 50s, I can't remember, but she was telling her friend about it, and her friend laughed at her for wanting to do it because she thought it was too silly because she was too old for that. And the woman did it anyway. And oftentimes these comments are made to women whenever or people, I guess, just in general, but whenever you want to do something, but you're deemed, older, quote unquote, older. And I'm just so curious of your thoughts on that specifically.
Oh, this is a great one. And I think what's happened is I'm obviously quite extroverted, and I'm quite comfortable with myself. So I think what that did is, in the room that was the adults class, and then my son came in, there was this banter and joviality and sense of like belonging, like it's okay for us to be here, that a number of other adults really stepped up, older adults stepped up, as well as other ones sitting in the audience watching their children were then seeing quite a vibrant adult community growing and then wanted to be part of it. So the adults community in our studio actually grew quite substantially, and I'm really proud of that. I didn't mind getting given the mic, so occasionally the mic would come my way, and I would always just give honor for the fact that the studio actually offered adults classes, because it's quite a risk to do that. Adults don't always have the capacity to commit to long-term situations, so you never really know if you're going to get return on investment. But this studio consistently enabled these two classes. Actually, I was in the intermediates and there was a beginners, and I couldn't make that one. Anyhow, the point I'm making is we were able to create this space where we could invite, and people could actually see, like I did through a different avenue, but the same concept. It was this, I could do that, and I'd really like to do that, and I wonder what that's like. And so, yeah, the permission slip was very much already there. And I think, for me, I never experienced anyone give me any kind of smack talk about being older in that environment. I'm kind of prepping myself a bit more for that in the next environments I'm looking to participate in.
Okay. Well, then we'll have to touch base with you after the fact with that. Well, and it's 40s are not old, and arguably 50s are not either. But it's just that limiting mindset that people have as well. Okay, so you also started breakdancing,
Mhm.
And that also very cool as well. And I'm curious to know with hip hop, and then do you call it breaking or breakdancing or break? What's the
Yeah,
correct
it's
terminology?
breaking. Yeah, break.
Breaking.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's actually linked back to a musical aspect. So it
Oh.
all started in the 70s in the Bronx, New York City. But in music, there's always a break. Well, there's not
Hmm.
always. In most genres, there's a break in the music where it's just like an instrumental or a percussion main. And as it was back in the day with the whole DJ with actual records, a particular DJ worked out that at that point in the music, the dance floor lit up and there was kind of different activity and more vibrant dynamic activity, which has eventually become what we would deem breaking.
Hmm.
And he kind of isolated that break in the music to be like a continual loop. By the way, he magically created those things that I'm pretending to know. And I know, isn't it a crazy thought? Like, just wow, what a start. Like, how organic is that?
Right.
And then they kind of obviously people jumped on that, went, how did you do that? That's great. Dancers went, oh, keep that going. We know what to do with that. And eventually this genre of hip hop was formed. And that it's actually a lot deeper. There's so much community and identity associated with breaking because there's four elements of it. There's the hip hop, there's DJing, there's MC or rapping, and then there's like graph artists as well. And it's just like, I didn't know any of that. I'm like, okay. So it's really a stepping into a whole, it's not an ideology, it's just a belonging and something that grew out of people's need for community and people and expression. So, yeah, it's called breaking, never break dancing.
Okay. It's funny when I was like I was writing my questions out and the Google Doc kept correcting my breakdancing to breaking. And I was like, why are you
Wow.
doing this?
I
Isn't that
wonder,
funny?
that must be a post Olympics, I reckon, because
Oh, maybe so.
conversation like the recent Paris Olympics, which we won't talk about, but yeah, that I think that conversation was not being had prior to the Olympics.
Huh. Okay. Well, okay. So getting back to you with your story for breaking and how you decided to switch or jump over to breaking, I want to hear kind of how that transpired as well.
So I think the studio that we're in, obviously, as a studio would go, they tackle all the genres. So I alluded before to my son being a popper. So all the genres of hip hop were being addressed in class form. And then, of course, as a parent of children and a student myself, you watched all the concerts and were participant in all the rehearsals. So you saw all the genres. And I was always really drawn to the breaking, more so the higher ranked stuff where it's really really special to watch. And I would literally like, oh, when's breaking on? You'd look at the breakdown or the list, and I would make sure I went out and looked at it. So when that twigged in me that I actually really enjoyed breaking, watching breaking, it still hadn't clicked that I wanted to participate in it until I think I just wanted to explore movement a little bit more. I think might be the best way to describe. And after the adults classes, which were a 1 hour class, because of all the Pilates background and the recognition that my body was giving me really clear signals, I couldn't just up and walk out of that room. I had to warm down and make sure I was adequately stretched because I'd pay for it the next day if I didn't. From that, I was actually starting to kind of really get to know my body, if that made sense. And I felt like there was more I wanted to do with it. Hip hop's very up and down, but the teacher that we had in terms of you standing upright and you do a lot of bounce and a lot of fantastic big movements. And our teacher, because he's actually got a breaking background, had dabbled in putting elements of breaking into our routines. And I just really liked those things. And I'd put my hand up and go, can I work on those? So that it made me have to work harder to learn these elements of dance that weren't implicitly hip hop.
Hmm.
And then one day after class in one of my cool down sessions, because conversations happen, other people go, oh, I should do that too. And they start doing it. And my son was there going, oh, mum will she'll get up me if I don't do this. But the teacher would come over and chat, or I'd ask him qualifications like, can you confirm that this is correct with this move, with this routine? And then I just said to him one day, I want to learn how to swipe which is quite a significant power move, which I'm still trying to learn how to do because I have hips and I do not know how you get the power through the hips the way breakers do. But, men created breaking and women work really well. We're great. Breakers are great. I love how versatile it is, but men were the beginners of breaking. So it came this, again, another organic little moment. I just went, I want to learn to swipe. The teacher dutifully went through it. I worked out quickly. I can't do it. So I went, well, I'm going to need to build strength here and here because swipe, you literally throw yourself, you catch yourself. You're on the ground, but you're leaping partially off. And so I just started again back to that drilling thing about my personality. I just started working on all the elements of my body that were going to need to be conditioned to do this move. And then the teacher went, well, you should learn this too. And so he taught me 6-step, which is a footwork. And I just really started to love it. And then, I don't know, about a year or so went by, I was doing this on the side, just at home, and I'd do little videos on it and kind of understood that it was a bit of a unique space because I couldn't really see anyone online who was beginning breaking at my age and dealing with just like, I'm not a small person. I'm not highly athletic. I've become more so, but I wasn't. I've had babies. I've carried them. I've kind of not looked after my body, not understanding, you just don't know what you don't know. And breaking was making me assess every element of my body in the way I would if I went to the gym and just started to do a head to toe body conditioning program. So it was pretty enthralling, actually, how it all started.
Yeah, that's so neat. It's just like it is another kind of slow, organic way to get you into breaking as
Yeah.
well. When you would practice, and even now too, when you practice to learn a move or a routine or whatever it may be, how much time are you putting into it? How often are you taking classes? Like, what is that looking like for you now, I guess,
Yeah.
compared to when you initially started to?
Yeah. Well, I wasn't taking any specific training for breaking. It was one class a week hip hop, and then I did my own enjoyment time at home. So I really wanted to make sure I knew how to do fundamentals well. And I'm still very much an amateur in hip. I have so much respect for people who are professional dancers and recognize how many hours would be required. But the dynamics of my world didn't allow me to have those sorts of hours. So I just loved what I could do and did the best I could and still do that. So I would love to be dancing hours a day. That's for me to do that would require at least 15 to 20-minute prep time. And even now I apply this anyway. So I've got to get my body ready to move because I'm not 21. And then I've got certain drills that I want to work on to do things better. So everything's still very entry level. From my perspective, it's still very entry level. And to go back to the question about training, I now have a breaking coach. His name's Nathan, and he's like less. I don't know how you would determine that. I'm a lot older than him, and it's a really interesting dynamic sometimes where he will just do a thing, and I'll look at him with this blank face and go, "I actually have absolutely no idea how you did that." So he's got to go, how would I describe this? Because he's basically having to go back to when he was like 12, 13, 14, where you don't necessarily think through everything. You just kind of copy what the teacher does. And he then perfected it. Now I'm asking him to critically pull it apart and then tell me orally, because I learn more from instruction. So verbal instruction, when you jump, kick this leg, land on that, move this. And I literally need that to teach me. So in class, I have one class a week, which is 45 minutes. And I work on certain components and then bring that to class. I have quite a busy other part of my life. So I'm still mum of 4, wife of 1. They're all still home. We run a clothing brand. My husband has a business. He also studies. So there are some weeks I rock up to class and I kind of haven't had decompressing space yet. And I just kind of have to sit there and we just do our warm-up drills. And then he'll just ask me, where are you at? And I've kind of got to address that first before I start throwing my body around, which kind of feels like I do.
Yeah.
He doesn't like me using that term, but it does feel like I'm throwing my body around. So yeah, I'm in the mornings work best for me because I don't have to deal with all the questions and phone calls and
Mhm.
emails. So at about between 5:36 is my aim to be up and doing at least half an hour of work. And there's a lot of elements to breaking, so it's not like I can just get in there and do like a little. I can always just do something, but I choose to try and be diligent to work on each element as best that I can until I need a specific oversight and go, okay, I'm up to my limit there. I'll need oversight. So then I have a book and I write down those things so I can bring them to training and go, hey, I need help with these things.
Yeah. That's so neat. I just love that you're, it's this hobby of yours. It's this form of exercise. It's this enjoyment for yours. It sounds like it's kind of like you said, it's a decompressing time. It's one of the first things you do in the morning. And because you have this whole other life as well. You're homeschooling. Yeah. Like how you said, you're a wife of one. Just made me laugh. Uh, and you have your own business as well. And I'm going to jump into the business in just a second, but I also want to know with breaking and hip hop, are you hoping that it'll turn into something else like competition, or are you wanting it to strictly be this hobby that you love and you just want to perfect, get better and better at?
Yeah. I'd be lying if I said I want to keep it a hobby because it's not. It's not. There is, as well as being all those things you just said, it's actually also like an act of worship for me. I alluded before to some music elements when it came to like singing and worshiping. And in Australia, particularly, we've got a very stoic culture in our churches, which is not necessarily somebody told us to be. It's just an outworking of who we are as a colonial nation, I think. And it's changing a little bit with immigration and the like. But I think part of the reason why I found hip hop dancing really challenging initially is because I just wasn't used to full body movement. It's not very white Australian, to use that terminology, and it certainly wasn't part of my world. So as I've started to loosen up and really feel free to move, I've realized how much of that I want to move with a sense of freedom to say, wow, Lord, thank you. Thank you for every breath I have. Thank you for the ability to grow and learn and reach people and just be present. And movement, and I think a lot of people have this journey, movement really opens up a whole new element of living. And so within breaking is that for me. I'm very invitational. I like to invite other people to come in and cipher with me, cipher's like a jam session for dancers, like it would be for musos. So you get to explore and play and like not show off in a egotistical sense, but like, hey, I've been working on this, have a look at this. And people go, whoa, and it's a nice moment. But more than that, it's just because you're sharing creatively what you've been gathering and working on. And you also work on like when things fail and you're like, oh, you can giggle about all that. But I would love to be somebody who others can see enters a battle, and in competition terms, in breaking, it's called a battle, and that comes back to that original culture of breaking where it was literally like instead of talking, they danced, battled. I can do this. Can you do better? Yep, I can do that, and I'll do it better. And then it kind of became this leveled thing. And breaking's changed quite a lot from those original crew battles because the individual breaker, say myself now, needs to kind of be on top of all the elements of breaking. So there's top rock, which is kind of, as the words suggest, you're upright and you're moving in a rocking fashion, but there's a lot more to it. It sounds very arbitrary, but like there's a lot of fun and movement in that. And then there's drops where you go down to the floor. So you don't just stop and go down to the floor. There's ways of going down to the floor which are quite musically connected, or connected to the music. Then you've got floor work, then you've got power moves, you've got freezes, and then you've got all your transitions in the midst of that. And back in the day, there would be specialists of each of those in your crew, and you would kind of battle your specialization, and then the battle would move on to the next skill set. And so, Johnny would come in and do that skill set. And then someone would come in and do another power move. And Johnny's like, well, I'm not the power moves guy. I'll let Ben do the power moves. And you get what I mean? Like nowadays, the individual breaker and the Olympics showcased this. Everybody's afoot all of it. And as an individual battler, you kind of got to have the whole gamut. So it's a massive, massive physical outworking. And battles, someone can go in and do like a 40-second to 2-minute set. I call them a set. And it's dynamic and anaerobic, and you've worked really, really hard on so many elements of your body's physicality, your mind, the musicality, and then understanding what's coming at you. Because if someone in a battle gives you something in a move, you're supposed to respond to that movement, like a debate would be with words. You do it with a dance move. And incorporating that into your set that you've kind of worked on is part of battling. So if I at 40 something, probably moving more toward 50, can own my space in a battle, then I would want someone to go, I could do anything. If she can get in there and do that, I can go do that thing that I've been thinking of doing. And I'm not going to let myself talk myself out of it anymore. Does that make sense?
It makes great sense. I love it. I'm like listening. I'm like, yes, Adele. I love that. That's awesome. What age were you I know you were 41 when you started hip hop. What age were you when you started breaking?
45.
45. Okay. Okay. That's so cool. Love it. Okay. Well, I'm going to switch gears. So I want to, because I want to talk about your business. So you mentioned how you homeschooled your children, and according to your website, you chose to do so by building family culture. What is family culture? What does your family culture look like?
Yeah. So firstly, my husband's, as I said before, is Samoan. So he was born and raised somewhere I wasn't. So the first thing we needed to work out is what are our commonalities and what are the things that we both unequivocally and undisputably hold. And for us, that was Christ at the center of our marriage. And so everything we wanted to build couldn't be from the alternate or somewhat opposing some days cultures that we grew up in. It was, right, who are we now? Who are we made to be? What are the guidelines of that, which is obviously what the Bible would help us with. And we grew our little peoples from this framework of Christ-likeness. So our home culture is actually what the name of the brand ended up being, which is soul submitted. So we chose to submit our lives to being in Christ. So we're born again, we know who he is, we know who he makes us to be, and are fully alive to that. And so we choose a life of obedience and submission and freedom, and there's a lot of incredible things I can say there. So the home culture, so how that outworked when they're little, we didn't allow them to bully one another. We didn't allow them to speak poorly to one another. We were quite, we had a lot of fun, Erica, like a lot of fun, and we still do have a lot of fun. So if you look at any of our Instagrams, I think my daughter put something up yesterday. We're working on a design, and I needed to exit for a moment to help someone else in the family, and the two closest in age were working on it together. And you watch that, there's just a lot of fun where they're doing voices and playing together, and also critically assessing this design in front of them and literally working to an outcome. But, the cat comes in the midst of it and the like. And I think the home culture was, let's learn together and bring out of each one of us. So initially that was my role, because as little people, they needed to be little, just play and enjoy life and do well, growing. It's to bring out of them the gifts that are in them. And as they grew older, they got to understand why they were different. So we did kind of a bit of personality profiling, and we didn't allow that to become like rules. It was more a sense of understanding. So if somebody's particularly quiet, when there's a confrontation, it's don't see it as a negative thing. Let's consider why that person's really quiet, and, you know, more and more from a compassion and empathetic point of view. So we've grown these 4 quite articulate, almost all adult humans that have all they've all made their own commitment to Christ, which is an incredible privilege to watch unfold, because at one point you just have to do that regardless of whatever it is. And they're moving out of house will be the next part of that for me. And so our home culture, yeah, we just, you know, the music and everything, it was kind of, you got to turn up and you got to own doing the work, Erica. And I suppose that was personified more in the homeschooling. We would have our plans for the day. We would examine if we weren't doing those, like what's going on. Are we building some habits that aren't really helpful to you growing? Are we just too busy? Because you can do a lot of meetups and group activities when you homeschool. But it translated into, you know, you're not going to learn a song or learn harmony lines together unless you actually learn the song and then practice the harmony lines together. So that's one example, but I mean, it just translated to doing food together, cleaning house together, helping dad or helping mum. And now some days, I mean, the most recent, we rent we don't own our home, so we rent in Australia. And so that means at times you have to move when you don't want to. And the children being 23, 20 and 18, 15 could see that there was going to be an element of extra work, particularly on my shoulders, to kind of make all that happen. And they stepped in on the day, and I wasn't really panicked about it. It was just the realities, because they've seen this happen before. Like, well, we've done this before. We actually know what this takes. So they said, you know what, Mum and Dad, let us do this. Let us go find homes, and we'll bring a short list to you and Dad, and you guys can choose from our short list which houses we should go look at. And they did, and they took us out for a cafe moment, and we sat and looked at I suppose, a bit of a PowerPoint presentation. And we all as a family, like with a very adult concepts at play, chose these 2 homes, one of which we're now living in. That was very telling, Erica, because I could trust them. They actually knew. Yeah. They knew what our family needed. And then they all obviously helped with packing up and all the other elements of moving that are what they are.
I bet that was just a really neat moment to kind of, you know, let your kids step up and take care of that, and then just realize all this work that you've done, you're still doing as a mom, as you know, as the parents, and just allowing them to be adults or be, you know, be teenagers, be kids, to have a say and an input in the family and the family's decision. And I think that's neat. And I would imagine that plays into Soul Submitted Designs as well, that you said too, you were building a brand, and then in 2023 you created your own apparel company.
Yeah.
And you said your designs are minimal and simple and have a purpose. Mm-hmm. So I guess we have a little bit of time, but tell us about this purpose, and then who came up with the idea? Why, you know, how did this come to be?
Yeah. Why do we need another brand in the world?
Why does it exist? Yeah.
Well, I was certainly not looking to do it. I'll say that. I'm the creative visionary of Soul Submitted Designs, and it was born in the COVID time. So in Australia, we have a brand here, which I'm sure is global, and it's not synonymous only with this brand, but it got my attention because it was parading or using the cross really profoundly in its designs, to the point where it was like really extreme big cross on streetwear. And the presumption was, it must be a Christian brand, until you kind of look a bit closer at a brand, or you look at an individual shirt and realized quite a lot of the smaller font was actually not at all Christian, and was kind of antagonistic to a Christian's worldview or a belief system. And I went, hey, that's not okay. And I thought, well, I can't stop them from using the cross, can I? But the next question was, well, where's the Christian alternative if I wanted to rep wearing the cross, but I wanted to know that the brand actually got it? They actually knew what the cross represented and the power thereof it. And of course, that kind of didn't go away. And then I would share that with a few friends, and they're good friends, Erica, because they say things like, so what are you going to do about it? And I'm like,
I love it.
I didn't want to hear that right now. But it wouldn't go away. It just wouldn't go away. And because COVID was what it was, and in Australia we had all the lockdowns and things as well, but we also had a lot of people reaching out for help. And my husband and I have been in ministry for a while through a number of small guises. We've never pastored a church as such. That's a really big gig, and I really respect what that takes. And we, by the grace of God, got to look after our little brood, and then this is becoming pretty massive. So I'm happy for the quietness that was, but we were in ministry and we were known, and people reached out in COVID, and we were doing a lot of ministry work via Zoom and phone, and we were doing the work ourselves to just make sure we were keeping fresh, I suppose, just continually learning and growing and confirming the knowledge that we know is true and had changed our lives. So during one of those learning sessions for Adele, I was listening, and the preacher said, when you're born again, your spirit's brand new. We know this through scripture. You're a new creation in Christ. You don't have to worry about your spirit. But he goes, but the rest of your Christian life is just making sure that your mind and your will, your soul and your body, they're submitted to Christ. And I went, soul submitted. And I wrote it down, and I so rarely take notes when I listen to something. I'll write the scriptures down, and I think on the website it might be a picture of this. And I wrote soul submitted, and I kind of did this really poor cross through it. And I'm pretty sure I may even put a T-shirt. I wasn't even thinking of anything. I just heard the words soul submitted, and it really went clunk. Then when the circumstance of the other shirt company, or that agitation was really starting to grow in me, that, wait a minute, there's no alternative. And in Australia, obviously I can see there's brands in America doing great things, but to get that shipped to Australia is a significant cost. And I'm a little bit homegrown-y. I'm like, wait a minute, like, what about Australians for Australia kind of thing? And a friend of mine, we had a little pocket of time in 21 here where we could open up and meet together. So we all kind of sensed this could happen. So we're always at the ready to make that happen. And a friend of mine who was gathering, doing a lot of teaching and ministry said, we've got like a pocket here. I want to do 2 meetings. I want shirts. Give me 25 of your shirts. And it was like, what? I haven't even created them yet. So I so love Chrissy. Like, this is her to a T. It was sneaky of her, but that's what started the brand, because I had to go and I had to tweak the logo, and I had to confirm it. I had to work out how to print it. And then, of course, when you do those things, God goes, cool, now you're moving. I'm just going to put you over here. And the screen printer turned up in our world and went, let me show you what I do. And we're like, okay. And then we realized screen printing was really very flexible and low cost, but it worked with our life, where we didn't have a warehouse, and we didn't, like I said before, we rent, so we may have to move at any unforeseen time, and screen printing is quite movable. And my daughter, the one who was the dancer, even though she moved on from, she actually doesn't like being in competition, so she's a great dancer, wants to cheerlead people from the sides. She realized how big that was part of her world. So she's actually the screen printer, and it's been wonderful watching her grow as an 18-year-old. She didn't want to just get a 9-to-5 kind of job, didn't feel called to any specific skill set that was like, determinant, like, oh, I want to be a doctor or an accountant or a teacher. But screen printing and the brand has enabled her to explore entrepreneurship, business, marketing, obviously consumer relations on a really grand scale. Somewhat overwhelming scale at times. So she's now throwing her words. I'm throwing myself into this screen printing gig, Mum. I want to learn what this really looks like, beyond just our brand. So that was pretty special.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's just another avenue that you're providing for your daughter and, your kids to, it's a cool way to teach them as they're growing up how to run a business, and how do the others play a role in the company?
So our eldest, Samuelo, he actually teaches hip hop, and he was the one who encouraged me. He's our main model, but he also comes up with some designs. So he's often the one at the ready to do reels and put something together. And we're actually going to dance together. Soul Submitted's been invited to do some presentations in the next few months. So he and I will dance, and we're gathering a whole lot of Christians at the moment to get together and dance outside of the Soul Submitted presentations, but sort of we can sense something building. So he's a really vital part in the creative aspect of how we represent the brand. And he's also like my go-to guy for when I can't be at conferences or festivals. He goes, well, I'll do that one for you, Mum. And goes down as this cool 23-year-old with big Maui hair and, looks different than I do in the brand. And, he's quite tall and yeah, so that's been fantastic. Barnabas, he is our graphic designer. So I'll pen something, or my daughter will pen something rather arbitrary, and he will make that look decent and contemporary and all the things that I alluded to the Instagram reel my daughter and son did. You'll hear them working out how to create a design, but it's basically, can you do this? Can you do that? Can you do this? Can you make that? Can you make that? So he's the skills boy when it comes to graphics, and then making the files. Like you've got to vectorize your files, blah, 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 blah. So, and he's also very business minded. So he kind of at times pulls me aside and goes, what's your purpose for this? Why are you doing this? What's your return on investment for this? And we have very interesting conversations some days. Our youngest daughter, Gloria, is she just loves being part of family and she'll do whatever is required. So often she wants to be on this side of the camera where she's filming. Occasionally she comes on the front. I think that'll happen more. And my husband's just he's very much a part of, because it was born out of this thing he and I united to become. So he's very much in Soul Submitted. But the role he takes is more similar to the homeschooling. He would call himself the principal. If he was required, he would come in and sort something out. But he can see that this is something that was stirring in me, didn't stir in him, but he's one of the main wearers of the brand. And when he goes out to his set work, he's often wearing the brand and repping us strongly. So that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, that's really neat. So unique that, with the dancing, that it's in a way, mainly a family affair for the most part. And then the Soul Submitted designs as well. It was your idea, but your kids are a part of it in some capacity. You're teaching them and learning. And what's so cool with all of it is, the hip hop started at 41, breaking at 45, Soul Submitted, at 45 as well? Around the same time, maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And so you're doing all these things, and I love it. And I love what you said earlier too. I might butcher it just a little bit, but like, you're going to keep doing this because you want to show people, hey, it's, give people an inspiration and encouragement. And I love that with your brand, and even how you were saying with your dancing is a form of worship, and your brand is to share Christ's name and get it out, so that there's an apparel that actually does represent Christ, that's Australian, that's native to your country. And I think that is great. And I'm going to ask you, Adele, my last question, just for time's sake, but I'd love to hear what you have to say. It's the question I ask all my guests. If there's somebody that's out there that's wanting to do something or doesn't know, if you could encourage one woman who may feel blocked or limited to pursue a dream or goal based on her age or her life circumstance, what would you say to her?
I would ask her about it would be about her little person. Like, is this thing that you want to do just somebody else's idea that you've grabbed, or is this something that you've realized you've actually always wanted to do? And I'd really hone in on that, because it's kind of bigger than the thing. It's more, there's part of you that's not hasn't been enabled or opened up yet. And I think that when you can see that it's not just about learning, I wanted to bounce or slide or be able to dance to that song. It's actually, no, I wanted to be free to move my body and be confident that I'm strong enough to do that. That's a way bigger reason And I can transfer that to so many elements of life. So I would want to ask them, like, is this something that's so deeply embedded in you that you have to do and you're just looking for an outlet? And I think that would allow them to rise above any perceived opposition, whether it be money, time, or somebody's opinion of it. All of those things become rather secondary when you are so aware, no, I've got to do this. And you become quite like, I don't care what you say, I'm going to do it. But it's from a humbling space of, because I know I need to do this. And I think that resonates. Like when you get around people that have made those decisions, one person I'd love to have been around was like Colonel Sanders, the guy who started KFC. Like, wow, how much resistance would he have had at the age that he was? But it's like, you've got to have an internal reservoir of your why. It is bigger than, well, I need to make money or I want to prove someone wrong. It's got to be, because if I don't do this, there's part of me that's not alive, that kind of thing. And it sounds really grandiose, but I think like, I know some accountants who are so enthralled with the service that they bring to bringing clarity and financial understanding to their clients. It's actually not about the money, the figures. It's about the freedom they see in the clients. And that's just the conduit that they work that out, while others it would be a nurse or a carer. It's a bit like that. Like, what do you need? What is this that has to be opened up in you and I think, and it is, I think, connected a lot to when you're little. And if somebody's got circumstances of the childhood that's been kind of traumatic, there'd be a lot to manage with that, but it's worth that journey. So in having those conversations, you may actually find it's kind of longer and harder and bigger, but I actually think it's worthwhile because you're going to go through a lot of healing and restoration and growth that maybe wouldn't have happened if you didn't have the idea initially of, I'm going to learn to paint or I'm going to do skydiving or whatever it is. So, yeah, it's kind of a strange answer, but I hope that makes sense.
No, it makes sense. I appreciate it. Thank you, Adele. Well, Adele, I know people can find you at soulsubmitteddesigns.com and social media, Soul Submitted Designs. Anywhere else we can find you?
Facebook, Instagram. There's a YouTube as well for Soul Submitted, and you'll find links back to me with that. I also have a podcast. It was it's kind of dormant for a little while, but just about movement. It was So How Do I Move Now? And you can kind of get a bit of background on some of the people that influenced me in my dance movement.
Yeah, I loved hearing your explanation, just talking about breaking and dancing and movement. I was just sitting there listening, thinking, man, there's so much depth to it that as a viewer, you don't necessarily know or fully understand. And then you always know that there's a story that's being told. So thank you for giving us a little bit of a lesson on that too. And Adele, I appreciate you so much for taking the time and sharing part of your journey and your story with us on the More Than Your Age podcast. If you were encouraged by today's episode, like and subscribe to this podcast, leave a review, and share this episode with a friend. You can find me on all of the socials at More Than Your Age. Keep striving for your goals, live fully, and we'll catch you next time on the More Than Your Age podcast.